It's funny how the source of stress disappears. It was the first time in a long while that I heard these words from my mother-in-law, who had been ignoring me until now. At first, I didn't understand why I should try to please her when it was my mother-in-law's selfish actions that had caused her to stop talking and inconvenience her grandchild. My mother-in-law has always lived a carefree and selfish life. We live together, and while I work, she's a stay-at-home mom, but doesn't do any household chores. My overly independent mother-in-law often leaves the house, and her actions are full of mysteries. I was so frustrated with my mother-in-law that I left home and ended up staying with my father-in-law. However, when I returned to my family home to verify what I had heard from my father-in-law, I was surprised to find that my mother-in-law was living in an unbelievably different way. It's probably because of her behavior that my mother-in-law has become isolated and ignored by everyone. My name is Kate. I have been in a relationship with my husband, Josh, since our student days, and we got married right after graduating. We had no worries about our marriage right after graduating because we both had secured jobs as civil servants. I had a job lined up as a local government employee at the ward office, and Josh became a busy national government employee. Even though Josh is busy, he takes care of various things around the house, making him a reliable and good husband. While I'm very happy to see Josh, who works diligently, succeed in his career, as the years of service increase, he has also experienced frequent transfers. We support Josh's transfers as they also signify career advancement in his role as a national government employee. Since he can be posted anywhere in Japan, including rural areas, solo assignments have become common. If the transfer location is close, he can come home on weekends, but when it's far away, there have been times when we couldn't see each other for over a year. My son Seth graduated from junior high school and went on to attend a boarding high school. While I naturally support Seth's choice to pursue his desired education, as a mother, I sometimes feel lonely when both Josh and Seth are away for extended periods and don't come home often. However, in reality, the absence of the two of them is not that big of an issue for me. My biggest problem is living with my in-laws at Josh's family home. The main culprit of the issue is Josh's mother, Jenny. Jenny lives a carefree and laid-back life to the point where her husband, Zach, is often exasperated by her behavior. In particular, she has not only expressed a dislike but also admitted to being bad at household chores before we started living together. I used to enjoy household chores, so I didn't pay much attention to it, but Jenny's inability to do household tasks was beyond what I had imagined. Surprisingly, the first thing I did after getting married was cleaning up the house, as it was quite messy when I moved in. And since we started living together, I ended up doing all the household chores. It seemed that Zach was the one who was most delighted about us living together, perhaps because of this. While Josh did help with household chores and tidying up, as he began to have solo assignments for work more frequently, my responsibilities inevitably increased. I found out after marriage that Zach worked for an international company. He not only had solo assignments in various branch offices across Japan but also had international transfers, which were not uncommon. Considering that, Josh's transfers within a limited domestic range are still relatively mild. After several years of living with Josh's family, both Zach and Josh started solo assignments, and at the same time, Seth also began school and moved out. As a result, I ended up living with just Jenny. I have a job, so I'm not at home during the day. Since getting married, Jenny has been a stay-at-home mom, so I tried to communicate that even though she may not like it, I would appreciate her helping out a bit, considering she seems to have free time. However, it was in vain. She would start with, "What are you talking about? Housework is the wife's duty, right? I also had a tough time when I was younger," and then launch into stories of her hardships as a wife every time. I became curious and asked Zach just once if Jenny had really struggled so much as a wife. "No, there shouldn't have been any such struggle. We've been leading the same life since the beginning of our marriage," Zach replied. All of Jenny's bragging about her past hardships turned out to be lies in the end. Jenny, who was not good at household chores, stubbornly refused to live with Zach's parents, and in the end, Zach built the current house. While living together, there were things about Jenny's lifestyle that seemed mysterious and made me curious. There were days when I wondered what on earth Jenny did all day as she seemed to laze around, and then there were days when she seemed to have gone somewhere and returned later than me. Jenny, who leads such a carefree life, sometimes says surprising things. You know, you have a job and must have a lot of money, right? So, consider it as financial support, and share some with me. After all, you're living in this house, so be grateful. Jenny's behavior, constantly demanding pocket money despite doing nothing all day, was something I couldn't understand. I couldn't even imagine what she was spending the money on. I didn't want to sour the relationship too much since we were living together. And so, unable to ignore Jenny's words, I reluctantly handed over the money that was in my wallet. Seth had been doted on by Jenny since he was a child, but due to the excessive physical affection and unnecessary gifts, her love seemed skewed. Because of this, Seth had started avoiding Jenny. Feeling overwhelmed by Jenny's excessive affection, Seth decided to escape it by enrolling in a boarding school for high school. When Seth was gone, Jenny lost interest in everything and started spending her days lounging around the house. As a result, Jenny's physique noticeably deteriorated, and she kept gaining more and more weight. Living together, I believed that health management was important, so I made efforts to adjust the seasoning of the dishes considering Jenny's age. However, she would often complain, saying, "This doesn't have any flavor at all. What are you doing? My son's wife is completely useless." And then, she would use an astonishing amount of seasonings to add taste to the food. Afterward, Jenny continued to gain weight, and there were days when she didn't move a step all day, from the time I left for work until I returned home in the evening. Occasionally, it seems she goes out, but on such days, there are convenience store bags and snack wrappers scattered around Jenny. I worry that she might get sick if she continues like this, but Jenny completely disregards my opinion. Jenny continued to issue orders to me, even though she ignored my opinions and never looked me in the face. "Hey! Is dinner ready yet? Hurry up! I'm so hungry I can't move. Is this some kind of retaliation against me? Honestly, my son's wife here is so thoughtless. Is it because you've gained weight that you can't move?" I thought that, but I didn't say it out loud. Because every time I said something to comfort Jenny, it would come back as about 10 times more sarcastic remarks. I got fed up with Jenny's attitude, so in the end, I started doing the housework without paying any attention to her. During summer vacation, the dormitory closed, and sometimes Seth would come home. However, he didn't spend much time at home because he felt he couldn't just play around during summer break as a student. When Seth came home, it seemed like he started working part-time in the local area. I thought about letting him relax during summer vacation, but he's not a child anymore, so I thought I should let him do as he pleases. However, Jenny was entirely different. Jenny doted on her only son, Josh. However, whenever something happened, she would often impose her own circumstances on Josh or interfere unnecessarily. Josh had started keeping his distance from Jenny, who constantly bothered him with such troublesome matters. That affection was now directed towards Seth, her grandson. However, Seth was also getting tired of Jenny from Jenny's burdensome interference and excessive affection. Surely, Seth seems busy every day, probably to avoid Jenny. The end of summer vacation was approaching, and it happened to be right before Seth's birthday as he was about to return to the school dormitory. Because it was Seth's birthday, who she dotes on, Jenny started to enthusiastically mess up the kitchen in an attempt to cook for her grandson for the first time in years. However, when Seth tasted the dishes prepared by Jenny, he immediately stopped eating. "It's terrible. The seasoning is too salty and overly sweet. It's really not edible." Seeing how disappointed Jenny was when she heard his opinion on the dish, Seth, thinking he might have been too harsh, decided to eat another dish and praise it to be considerate. "This is delicious. Yeah, I could eat many of these." However, the dish that Seth praised was one that I had made. Hearing Seth's words, Jenny became even more dejected and, feeling frustrated with the situation, went to her own bedroom. What remained were a large quantity of Jenny's uneaten dishes and the aftermath of her messy kitchen. Saying sorry about this, Seth helped with the cleanup, but by the time we finished, it was past midnight. The next day, Seth returned to his school dormitory, and as she saw him off, Jenny hurriedly returned inside the house. And from that day forward, Jenny didn't utter a single word to me. Afterward, Jenny would eat whatever was served, but she always left a complaint note on the table. Then, she'd lounge on the living room sofa. At first, it was just during meals, but gradually, she started leaving complaint notes all day long, from morning until bedtime, placing them all over the house where I would see them. "Could you please stop this already?" When I tried to talk and resolve the situation, the words that came back from Jenny were beyond imagination. "I'm the one who's had enough. If you talk to me again, you'll owe me a fine of $80. I couldn't understand why Jenny would say such a thing, so I was baffled and didn't even bother responding. After that, Jenny continued to ignore me as usual, but she always left complaint notes in places where I could see them. Such a life continued for 2 months, and I reached my limit. I wrote on the back of one of Jenny's complaint notes, "I won't come back anymore," and handed it to her. In response, for the first time in a while, Jenny spoke, but her words were nothing short of surprising. "Haha, wouldn't it be great to get rid of the source of stress? Can you please leave this house soon?" She then threw my bag at me along with the complaint note that was there. Feeling overwhelmed by Jenny's abusive behavior and unable to deal with it any longer, I decided to pack my belongings and leave the house on the same day. However, even though I left home, my parents' house was far away, and I still had my job, so I had nowhere to go. Not wanting to return to the house where Jenny was, I stayed at a capsule hotel near the train station for about a week. Afterward, I remembered that Zach's job transfer wasn't too far away, so I asked if he could let me stay with him for a little while. I talked to Zach about running away from home, the reasons behind it, and Jenny's attitude that led to it. Knowing Jenny's personality well, Zach readily agreed to let me stay with him. "Welcome, it must have been tough," Zach said as he welcomed me. From Zach's temporary work assignment location, I could still commute by train, and it didn't affect my job. More than that, enduring life with Jenny while staying in that house was something I couldn't bear. As I expected, I felt mentally relieved, and I was able to lead a completely normal life. Zach said it's no problem for me to stay as long as I need since there is extra space in the house. Before I knew it, 3 months had passed since I ran away from home, taking advantage of Zach's kindness. I began to feel that it wasn't right to rely on Zach's kindness any longer, so I discussed with him the idea of returning home soon. Then, Zach let out a deep sigh and took out a small album from the back of a cupboard. He showed it to me. The album that Zach brought out contained many photos of Jenny. Surprisingly, in the photos, Jenny was always seen getting along with various young men. And while showing me the photos, Zach told me about what Jenny did when she wasn't at home. We're talking about a time before we got married. Zach went on a business trip as usual, leaving Jenny behind, and during that time, Jenny lived alone. Worried that Jenny might feel lonely on her own, Zach planned a surprise visit on her birthday to make her happy. Upon returning for Jenny's birthday, the first sight Zach saw was Jenny walking with an unfamiliar young man. Thinking that he might have been mistaken, Zach followed Jenny. However, Zach reported that after conversing happily with the man, Jenny went into a hotel with him. From then on, sometimes when Zach went back without telling Jenny, he began to see Jenny walking with different young men. Zach began to take photos just in case, as a precaution, it seems. However, Zach couldn't bring himself to confront Jenny with this evidence directly. So, he kept the photos hidden along with his unresolved feelings. He considered the option of ignoring it and discarding the evidence altogether. However, he couldn't bring himself to dispose of the photos and data, which is why he still had them all this time. Not only was it her overbearing attitude towards me, but also the fact that she had betrayed kind-hearted Zach that I couldn't forgive. I borrowed the photo data from Zach and went back home. I had left that messy house untouched for 3 months. I returned, thinking that perhaps she had realized just how important my presence was, but her attitude was significantly different from what I had expected. As I unlocked the front door and entered the house, I noticed that Jenny saw me return and poked her head out from the entrance. And Jenny's first words were condescending toward me. "You finally came back, huh?" But her demeanor was different from usual. Something seemed off about Jenny. I entered the house, determined to find the source of the strange odor that had been bothering me since I came in through the front door. To my surprise, the entire house, except for the area near the entrance, was filled with garbage, and there was no place to step without treading on trash. Upon closer inspection, the garden, as well as every pathway leading through the property, was completely covered in garbage. In a situation that was beyond my expectations, I was left speechless. I turned my back on Jenny and tried to leave just like that. Then, Jenny completely changed her attitude from before. You see, in this situation, you can't really live here, right? Do you understand? We can't leave it like this. So, won't you help me clean up this mess? She seems to be saying something reasonable, but in the first place, it was her who turned this house into a garbage dump. She spoke to me with a bit of arrogance, but her face was pale, and she looked visibly distressed. She was probably asking for help while intending to make me clean up all this mess. Certainly, it's impossible to live normally in a house surrounded by this much garbage. I couldn't bring myself to help Jenny, who had created this situation for herself. I explained the real reason for my return to the flustered Jenny. "Jenny, today is your birthday, right? This is a present." The moment Jenny saw what was inside the envelope I handed her, her face turned pale and she started trembling. Cold sweat wouldn't stop pouring from her face. "What is this?" "It's what you enjoy, Jenny. Pictures from your fun times." Jenny's legs gave way, and she sat down right there. Jenny, her face turning pale, fell silent as she stared fixedly at the scattered photographs on the ground. At that moment, and with perfect timing, Josh returned home as a surprise for Jenny's birthday. "Mom, I'm back. Today's your birthday, right? What's going on? Can you explain this situation to me, for starters?" Josh looked around the house in shock. His childhood home, which he had returned to after a long time, was filled with trash, so anyone would be surprised by the sight. Unable to even meet eyes with Josh, Jenny broke down in tears on the spot without saying anything. In the process, some of the scattered photos flew to Josh's feet. "Are these you, Mom?" With the scattered photos in hand, Josh stared at Jenny with an astonished expression. Unable to bear her son's cold gaze, which was a far cry from the affection he used to show, Jenny began to panic. Jenny's panicked words offered no excuse or explanation. "This is not what it looks like. What is different then?" For the first time, I saw the usually gentle Josh raise his voice to a surprisingly loud level. He was genuinely angry to that extent. "Mom, I actually know everything," he said. "What? What do you mean?" His return today wasn't a coincidence. I had already told Josh about being away from home for 3 months and staying with Zach during that time. And I synchronized my return with Josh's timing. Of course, I also told Josh about the photos that Zach had hidden, but it seemed that Josh had already been suspicious of Jenny. Josh had planned to confirm the truth directly with Jenny during this visit, but unexpectedly, the entire house was filled with garbage, causing his suppressed anger to explode. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Jenny is rubbing her head against the floor and bowing in a deep apology, but there was no indication from Josh that he was ready to forgive her. Josh had a vague suspicion that Jenny was going out at night while Zach was on a business trip. Zach had been away on business trips for a long time, and it seemed that Jenny had been going out at night to cope with her loneliness, or so Josh thought. However, Jenny's way of going out was more intense than Josh had thought, and she had become famous in places she didn't know about. I wasn't around during the day because of work, so I didn't notice, but Jenny's overly free lifestyle had become widely known in the neighborhood. Thinking back, Jenny had been living a solitary lifestyle all this time, and she had no interaction with the neighbors whatsoever. Of course, there were no visitors to Jenny's house, be it friends or neighbors. Realizing that he couldn't continue living in this cluttered environment, Josh decided to move out immediately. And so, my husband and I truly moved out of the house. I told Zach everything that had happened, including the fact that Jenny had admitted to what she had done and that Josh had been furious, leaving Jenny feeling down. I also conveyed that our home had become extremely cluttered, with no space to even walk around. And then, after heaving a big sigh, he suddenly burst into laughter. Afterward, I heard from Zach that he had sent the divorce papers, which only required Jenny's signature, to our house. However, there was no sign of her submitting the documents. And so, despite Zach's frustration with Jenny's refusal to agree to the divorce, he was unable to proceed with it in the end. However, after transferring the house's ownership to Jenny, Zach moved abroad and seems to be enjoying a carefree retirement life. Left alone in the house, Jenny had to live on her own without any help or support from anyone. Jenny was informed that her past wild partying had become widely known in the neighborhood and had become a famous story. Knowing how she was perceived by those around her, Jenny had become unable to go out in public properly. With no income, Jenny relied solely on home delivery for her shopping, and her debts had accumulated. She couldn't even afford the maintenance costs for the house in her name. After that, nobody knew where Jenny was or what she was doing. I started a new life away from Josh's family home, but eventually, I ended up quitting my job. The reason for this was that I decided to accompany Josh on his nationwide transfer. Surely, if Seth had still been very young, I might not have considered such a thing. Seth was also enjoying dormitory life, and he understood my decision to travel around the country with Josh. Due to Josh's transfer, there was a period when we could live near Seth's school. At that time, we were able to enjoy the pleasure of spending time together as a family after a long time. The job I'm currently doing is online, so it doesn't matter where in Japan I am located. Living with Josh involves moving almost every year, but lately, it has become something we look forward to. Certainly, moving can be a bit challenging, but more than that, traveling to different places has been a very refreshing and exciting life for me. I'm enjoying my current, free and new lifestyle to the point where I think it would have been better if I had started this way from the beginning.